Get
So
out
this
of my
HOA
house
President
right
literally
now,
kicks
or
down
I
my
swear
cabin
to
door
God,
right when
you
I'm
will
having a beer
regret
with the
it.
state's attorney general. She just committed 6 felonies in front of the one
know
person
my
in
rights,
America
officer.
who could
You
throw
have
her
no
ass in
probable
prison.
cause to detain
I'm
me.
talking full on let me through right
now,
now,
or
or
you'll
your
regret
designer
it.
heels clicking on broken glass. The whole 9 yards, this woman in her $1,000 blazer, reeking of that aggressive perfume that probably cost more than my truck payment, storms into my grandfather's cabin, screaming about violations and jurisdiction like she owns the place. Zero clue who she just barged in on. Zero clue. She's live streaming her own arrest warrant to 3,000 followers. 6 months earlier, I thought Karen was just your typical power-drunk neighbor. Turns out she was running a $250,000 embezzlement scheme, and I was about to accidentally burn her entire criminal empire to the ground. What would you do if some HOA psychopath invaded your private property during the most important meeting of your life? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I guarantee half of you have dealt with these neighborhood dictators before. Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. 6 months ago, life was pretty damn good. My name is Marcus Henley, I'm 52. And after 30 years of crawling through muddy trenches, installing power grids across 3 counties, I'd finally earned my retirement, the crown jewel my grandfather's fishing cabin on Clearwater Lake. 2 acres of pure heaven that old pop bought back in 1963 for $800. Can you believe that $800 for lakefront property that's now worth more than most people's houses? This wasn't some fancy McMansion. Mind you, we're talking hand-hewn logs. A stone fireplace that Pop built with his own calloused hands, and a screened porch that creaked in all the right places. I'd kept it completely off-grid by choice. Solar panels humming quietly on the roof, well water that tasted like childhood memories, and a septic system that actually worked better than most city setups. The morning mist rising off the lake each day reminded me why Pop chose this spot. He used to say the land picks you, not the other way around, smart man. He also used to say, Marcus, when someone wants your land real bad, find out why, because it's usually worth more than they're telling you. Then she showed up. Delilah Cromwell, though everyone just called her that HOA psycho. Rolled into our peaceful lake community like a tornado in designer clothing. 58 years old, fresh from some California subdivision, where apparently being neighborhood dictator was a full-time career. She drove this pearl-white Escalade with vanity plates that read, Rule 1, I kid you not, and wore her HOA President badge on her blazer like it was a sheriff's star. The woman had one mission in life: transform our rustic lakefront into what she called an upscale resort community. But here's what I didn't know then. 3 elderly couples had already sold their cabins to interested buyers within 2 months of her arrival. Funny coincidence, right? Her first act of war came on a Tuesday morning. I'm sitting on Pop's porch, drinking coffee and watching a pair of loons teach their babies to dive, when I hear these sharp clicking sounds on my wooden dock. Designer heels at 7:00 a.m. on my private property. 10 minutes later, she's taping this official-looking notice to my screen door. Violation citation, unsightly dock structure. Damaging community property values. Fine $500. Compliance required within 72 hours or daily penalties will accrue. I had to read it twice, my weather dock. The same one Pop and I had reinforced together when I was 12 was apparently an eyesore, threatening the entire neighborhood's real estate market. Being a reasonable guy, I walked over to explain that. My property actually predates the HOA by about 40 years. You know what she said to me? Standing there in my own driveway, hands on her hips like she owned the place. Everyone on this lake answers to me, sweetie. Ask the Hendersons how well fighting me worked out for them. The Hendersons, my elderly neighbors, who'd mysteriously decided to downsize last month after living here for 23 years. The pieces weren't clicking yet, but something cold settled in my stomach. That's when she started her photography session, circling my cabin like a real estate appraiser, snapping pictures of my solar panels, my vegetable garden, even my grandfather's hand-carved porch railings. The smell of her chemical air freshener, wafting from that idling Escalade, made me want to gag by the end of the week. I had 3 more citations. Each one came with escalating fines. Each one made it crystal clear that Delilah Cromwell had declared war on everything. My family had built on this land. I figured I was dealing with your typical power-tripping neighbor. Annoying, sure, but manageable. What I didn't know was that I just painted a target on my back in a game much bigger and more dangerous than petty HOA politics. Pop's words echoed in my head. Find out why they want your land. I was about to find out why, and it would change everything. Karen didn't waste time escalating to the big guns. 3 days after my compliance deadline passed. Because seriously, I wasn't tearing down Pop's dock for some wannabe dictator. A certified letter arrived that made my coffee taste like ash. Cease and desist, violation of community waterway regulations. The letterhead read Blackstone Meyer and Associates. One of those fancy law firms where the partners probably charge more per hour than I made in a month. The legal gibberish basically said my dock was illegally extending into community waterway, and I owed $3,000 in retroactive violation fees. Plus, they were threatening to slap a lien on my property if I didn't pay up within 10 days. My first instinct was panic. These people had lawyers, I had a toolbox, and a bad attitude. But then I remembered something Pop always drummed during those long fishing afternoons. Marcus, when someone's trying to legal talk you out of your land, the real truth is always in the county records. Never trust what they tell you. Go find the actual papers. So I drove down to the county courthouse, that musty basement where all the important stuff gets buried under decades of bureaucratic dust. The clerk, a sweet lady named Betty, who remembered Pop from his fishing tournament days, helped me pull the original property surveys. I'd learned this trick from my union days. Always check the source documents before some suit tries to buffalo you with fancy letterhead. What I found made my blood boil. My grandfather's lot didn't just go to the water's edge. It included 50 feet into the lake. The deed stamped and official from 1963 was crystal clear that Doc wasn't trespassing on community property. It was sitting smack dab in the middle of my lake. But here's the real kicker. The HOA wasn't established until 1998, 35 years after Pop bought his land. I remembered my old foreman always saying that older properties often have rights, that newer developments can't touch, something about grandfathered exemptions, that trump any neighborhood association nonsense. Armed with copies of everything, I marched back to my cabin feeling pretty damn proud of myself. That satisfaction lasted exactly until I tried to leave for groceries and found Karen's Escalade parked sideways across my driveway, not beside it. Not near it, directly blocking it. Like she was conducting some kind of one-woman traffic stop. When I knocked on her window, she rolled it down just enough to speak through the gap. "Oh, Marcus, I'm just reviewing the community parking regulations. This might take a while," the mechanical hum of her idling engine, mixed with that sickly sweet air freshener, created this surreal bubble of passive-aggressive insanity. Here I was, a grown man who'd built half the county's electrical infrastructure, being held hostage in my own driveway by a suburban soccer mom with a power complex. But Karen was just getting warmed up. Within a week, she'd organized something called the Lakeside Beautification Committee, which sounds nice until you realize it was basically a hit squad, targeting anyone who didn't fit her country club vision. Suddenly, neighbors who'd waved at me for years were crossing the street to avoid eye contact. Her Facebook posts were masterpieces of passive-aggressive warfare, concerned about eyesore properties affecting all our home values. "Some people just don't care about the community. Ha ha, Lakeside strong. Hashtag property values." The comment section turned into a feeding frenzy. People I'd known for decades were suddenly experts on property law, parroting Karen's talking points, like she was some kind of real estate prophet. 3 of my neighbors actually apologized to me privately. Tom and Susan Martinez pulled me aside during my evening walk and confessed that Karen had strongly suggested they complain about my property or face their own citation blitz. Apparently, she'd already targeted old Mr. Peterson for having non-regulation window boxes and threatened the young couple with the baby over their unsightly playground equipment. "She's got something on everyone," Tom whispered, glancing around like Karen might be hiding in the bushes with a camera. "Her husband works up at the state capitol connected, political stuff." That hit me like a cold slap. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This woman had reached beyond our little lake community. That night, I found orange spray paint covering my mailbox, bright aggressive strokes that spelled out "comply or leave." My security camera, solar-powered and hidden behind a pine tree, caught everything, including Karen's license plate as she drove away at 2:00 a.m. When I called the sheriff's office the next morning, guess who showed up? Deputy Chad Cromwell, Karen's nephew. He took one look at the vandalism report, shrugged, and said probably just kids. "You know how they are." The rough texture of that spray paint under my fingers, as I tried to scrub it off, felt like sandpaper against my soul. Pop used to say sometimes you need bigger guns for a bigger fight. Time to find some bigger guns. Karen's next move came disguised as civic duty. which somehow made it even more infuriating. She'd figured out that direct confrontation wasn't working, so she decided to weaponize the entire county bureaucracy against me. It started with a polite knock on my door from building inspector Dale Morrison, a guy I'd actually worked with on several projects over the years. The awkward look on his face told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "Marcus, I'm real sorry about this, but I got a complaint about unpermitted structures on your property. You know I have to follow up on these things." 3 hours later, Dale had crawled through every inch of my cabin with his clipboard and measuring tape. His conclusion, everything was not only up to code, but actually exceeded current safety standards. Pop might have been old school, but he'd built things to last. "Whoever filed this complaint," Dale muttered as he packed up his gear, "either doesn't know what they're talking about, or they're just trying to waste everyone's time." The next day brought Environmental Officer Janet Bennett, investigating reports of my septic system, contaminating the lake ecosystem again. Perfectly functioning better than most new installations. She admitted then. Fire Marshal Bob Rodriguez showed up to examine my solar panels for hazardous electrical violations. Clean bill of health there, too. Each inspection cost me a day of peace and a chunk of my retirement sanity. But more importantly, each false report was creating an official paper trail that made me look like some kind of problem property owner. I remembered something my union rep used to warn us about. Bureaucratic harassment was a classic tactic because it looked legitimate on paper, even when it was pure malicious bullshit. While I was dealing with the inspection parade, Karen was busy playing her media game. She'd managed to get herself interviewed by Channel 7's Community Spotlight segment, positioning herself as this concerned citizen, fighting to protect our family-friendly lake environment. The news story was a masterpiece of selective editing. She showed carefully angled photos that made my cabin look like some kind of backwoods shack, talked about dangerous conditions threatening children's safety, and painted herself as a brave advocate, standing up against irresponsible property owners. What really got my blood boiling was watching her stand on my dock, the one she claimed was illegally trespassing, while she delivered her concerned citizen performance for the cameras. The crisp sound of my phone, buzzing with angry texts from neighbors who'd seen the story, felt like machine gun fire. Half the lake community now thought I was some kind of environmental menace. But here's where Karen made her first real mistake. She got greedy, my old buddy. Jake Martinez from the Electricians Union called me up after seeing the news story. "Marcus, that lady's full of shit and everyone knows it. You build half the clean energy infrastructure in this county. Hell, your solar setup is the one I use as an example. When I'm training apprentices..." Within 2 days, Jake had organized a parade of my former coworkers to drive by and inspect my property. Turns out having 20 master electricians publicly vouch for your work tends to shut down the hazardous installation narrative pretty quick. That's when things started getting interesting. My lawyer buddy Chuck Davis, we'd gone to high school together, stopped by for a beer and mentioned something that made my ears perk up. "You know, Marcus, the Attorney General's office has been investigating HOA corruption cases across the state. Several communities reporting similar harassment patterns to what you're describing." "What kind of patterns?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Elderly homeowners getting hit with frivolous citations, property values artificially driven down, mysterious buyers swooping in with cash offers. Ring any bells? It rang every damn bell I had. Chuck explained that these schemes usually involved someone with political connections, providing cover while the harassment campaign drove out longtime residents. The properties would then get flipped to developers. For massive profits, the AG's office is looking for witnesses. Chuck continued, "People who've documented the harassment and can prove the pattern. Someone like you might be exactly what they need." The mechanical hum of my refrigerator seemed unnaturally loud as that information sank in. Karen wasn't just some power-drunk neighbor. She was potentially part of something much bigger and